you know, at its core, I certainly got into this because of my parents' work doing international community development. So I kind of grew up in various parts of the world, both in high poverty concentrations and also in larger metropolises where they were raising money. And I ultimately went on to lead an NGO. And what brought me to where I am today is one of the things I experienced with NGOs and people working directly with communities is that their relationships with funders and with companies that are trying to engage with them, that there was problems in that power dynamic. And so for me, I wanted to take my experiences on the NGO side and what it felt like on that side, come to this side of the table, to the funder side, to the volunteer side, and see if I can't take my past experiences to make us a better community partner as we engage both through funding and volunteering.
I love that. I love the definitely hold and has retained it ever since I've known him, Lindsey's the point of view of the nonprofit partner as a legitimate peer partner, which is great for the World Bank to have somebody embedded like that. Thank you for joining us. Lindsey, Hemang Desai is with SAP. He's social impact leader with the corporate social responsibility team, which is not complicated, but let's say robust at SAP. And he is also the co-founder of Ray of Hope International Foundation. And Hemang, I realize we've never really talked about that. Maybe now's not the right time, but thanks for being with us today.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. And thank you, Arzu, for having me as well on this great panel. So as Chris mentioned, my name is Hemang Desai, based in Philadelphia, part of SAP's corporate social responsibility team. For anyone who doesn't know, SAP is a global leader in enterprise business applications. So a large number of companies, over 400,000 companies, run SAP solutions to operate their businesses. And how I got into this work, so, Chris mentioned my foundation, Ray of Hope International Foundation, that my wife and I started back in 2011. It is an area that was always of interest to me, but I had only kind of known, I'll call it the traditional model, which is the nonprofit model, right, to create social impact. And I had a transformational experience. Maybe we'll talk about that in a little bit as well, through an experience I had at SAP in one of our flagship programs, the SAP Social Sabbatical, that truly opened my mind and my perspective on how the corporate world can truly create social impact, not just by writing checks and giving grants, but in a much more meaningful, long-term focused and sustainable way. So that really got me interested in it, and I was lucky enough to have the chance to join our CSR team at SAP. I did that 6 years ago, and I've been deeply loving it ever since that point of time. So great to be here, and I'm sure we'll talk more about all of that. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, that's looking forward to it. Thank you so much, Hemang. That's awesome. And Esther Hofstede, I never know if it's close enough. Okay. She is a social impact consultant for Netherlands national program, Good Busy. Esther is involved in a couple of different things. She's got her own consultancy in the Netherlands. She's worked with Good Busy teams. She's done a number of other things. One of the more interesting things I think about Esther is you are a ranked tennis player as well in your category, right? Yes. Okay. Which is kind of cool. I don't know very many quasi-professional athletes, but beyond all of that, Esther she really believes this stuff and lives it. And she's got a great example of some work she's been doing for years in the Netherlands. And so, thank you for joining us today, Esther.
Thank you. Yes, as a social impact consultant, my personal mission is care for each other and the world around you. So in everything that I do, I try to do this. And I got involved. I just noticed that a few years ago that it's actually my family situation that makes me do this work, because I like to bridge the gap between the companies and the non-profit organizations. And I like to do a lot for the homeless people, because my own sister used to be homeless and addicted. So in my work, I actually see the other persons that you don't know, and change the way they look at those people. So that's my motivation and my drive to do this work. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Okay, that's great. And I think with all of us, we're noticing this personal connection, this intrinsic sort of, this is kind of an extension of my identity, this area of work. So, okay, let's dive into it. The topic today, as we know, is a little bit difficult because we're trying to think about how employee volunteering could possibly be useful in the context of, say, a crisis or an issue, or addressing a geopolitical, within that context, sort of a difficult topic. So to use a safer example, here in the United States, even though I'm a Canadian, I live in Baltimore, obviously diversity, equity, inclusion has been something that I think the rest of the world has seen America go on and on about quite a bit. But then with a recent United States Supreme Court ruling, that seems to have changed, and quite a few companies that were going along with it because it was the right thing to do, meaning because that's what everybody else was doing, sort of began to pull back a little bit. And so we're seeing sort of some of the budget fall off, some of the initiatives fall off. And so some companies are basically, and with ESG, it's sort of the same thing. As these things become political or complicated or difficult or touchy, how in fact do companies get involved in a way that is still meaningful? It's not just transactional, but it can be transformative. And the one thing I want to say to set up the call, I think everybody that I'm talking to, Lindsey, Hemang, and Esther, and I, we all believe in the potential for a transformative experience for people when they get involved. So the thing that got us involved was an experience that made us have this moment where we said, wait a minute. And we asked ourselves a new question, or we began to ask a series of new questions, or look at something in a new way. And that moment set us on a new trajectory where I think we would say we embrace more inclusivity and diversity and whatnot, not because we thought ourselves into it as a logical choice, but because we had an experience. So when we do these volunteering experiences, do we do it in a way where that's the gift that we can offer other people, that they too can have an experience where they begin to ask new questions and take a different point of view? So along those lines, Lindsey, I thought I'd start with you because you've been sitting the quietest now for a little while. Yeah, I was just going to ask you a question about the World Bank. So you fund extensive DEI initiatives globally, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Some of these things are parallel, right? So we look, even though the bank in its development work does a lot of inclusion as part of its core work, just for the audience, my role very much looks like corporate social responsibility. And I'm going to lean into that as I think it's probably most relevant for this audience. And there's certainly parallel work, DE&I work going on globally in our offices that we oftentimes partner with and tail in with.
Okay. When you think about your volunteering experiences, how do you structure them in a way where you can kind of, I don't know, wrap in those principles or whatnot? Do you work directly with DEI on that, or do you just sort of understand it and you're applying those principles?
In some ways, it's all of the above. Certainly since George Floyd's murder in the US, the World Bank, as many other institutions, kind of ramped up their infrastructure around this. And I was part of the World Bank's global anti-racism task force, where a lot of this stuff got a lot more structure. And what we found is that sometimes it's partnering with the DEI work happening through, senior levels, and then sometimes it's office by office. And so we're oftentimes working to empower our local colleagues to work with local DE&I. And we see a lot of these things come up. But what we also saw was pre-existing programs that suddenly DE&I started, that we were already doing, that were inclusive. And we were seeing then our DE&I offices leaning into it. And in one particular case that I can talk about is our internship programs, where we've now seen DE&I offices take the lead and kind of replicate some of what we're doing through internships as a method for inclusion.
Okay, great. Let's come back to that in a moment. The World Bank is a great place to start because it's this huge NGO around the world. I mean, it's iconic. Let's go to a private sector company then and say, look, Hemang, I know SAP has been very intentional with programs like Social Sabbatical and whatnot to stitch in the connections between business drivers and this work that you're doing. And to the point, Hemang, the experience itself on the ground where that SAP employee is interacting with other people. How have you gone about bringing more intentional alignment with business drivers that happen to be pro-social, like diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that's actually, Chris, something we talk about a lot internally as a leadership team, but also with our leadership at SAP as well. You know, we need to really stop separating when we talk about the commercial interests or the business interests of the company and our DEI, sustainability, CSR goals and efforts themselves, because I think it's really a mistake to look at it that way. There's just a huge degree of interconnectivity between these topics, right? Like, as an example, when we talk about an experience like the social sabbatical, one of the core tenets of the program is around immersion into a different culture. So maybe I'll just talk very quickly about what the social sabbatical is for anyone who's not aware of that. It is a flagship, pro bono consulting or pro bono volunteering program that we have. We take a team of SAP employees selected from around the world, place them in an emerging market where they spend 4 weeks acting as consultants for nonprofits, social enterprises, really any organization that's focused on creating social and or environmental impact itself. And what the experience brings is so much more than just the social and environmental impact, right? There is so much what we call business value that comes from that experience. A prime example being one of our metrics we look at is around whether participants believe the program has increased their ability to work with and lead a global team. And SAP is a company that operates in over 100 countries. We have employees in over 100 countries and customers, I think, in 140 plus countries, last count I had. So that number, as an example, stands at 86% of the participants that go on these engagements believe they are better leaders and able to better collaborate globally, which to me is a critical success factor. If you want to succeed at SAP, you must be able to do that, right? And then the other part around kind of more concretely DEI and how all that meshes together, the learning and development of these employees also comes down to the mindset building, right? When you engage with people in a different capacity, when you're looking at their challenges, when you're looking at their day-to-day issues that they are dealing with, but also the passion, the energy, and the desire to really solve these societal challenges, you connect on a much different level through these volunteering activities, which shapes your mindset, shapes your empathy, and really makes you that more inclusive leader. And that's what drives culture within the company, right? So that's really what we think of when we look at this. We cannot separate that, because that's how people are coming back and making better hiring decisions and better promotion decisions and building better teams as a whole, and also how we work with our customers in the end.
Perfect. Hemang, I want to come back, because a big part of making the case to leadership that that it's worth doing something beyond just cleaning up a park or painting a wall. Not that those activities can't be transformative if they're done correctly. But if you want to go a little further out, you want to start meeting with migrants or new arrivals, and you know that that's going to be an explosive topic in the workplace. Can you reach back to some of those business drivers and say, hey, let me show you how it's worth it. We're going to come back to you for that. But before we do that, we've gone World Bank, global, SAP global as well, but more control in a sense because of the closed system of the brand, SAP in the private sector. And now Esther has worked with an entire country on helping to promote volunteering, and she's definitely taken a transactional approach. Lindsey and Hemang have talked about this sort of sort of enveloping an inclusive mindset in the work, and even looking for formal connections with other departments within the World Bank or SAP. And then we're going to go back and maybe look at being able to prove that that is happening. But Esther, when you were working with the Netherlands with Good Busy in the initiative, maybe you could explain a little bit about what was going on there, and what the goal of that was, but then also lead us into the very practical example, which politically could have been a hot topic, I think, in some ways with the meals that you put together. So Esther, thanks for joining us.
Yeah. So Hemang, SAP talked about the social sabbatical, where you go for a month, like in another country. But you can also start when you don't have so much time, like a lot of companies, they start local. So the example that I started a few years ago is where we have a cooking connection. So it's just the end of the day, once a month, we go to new arrivals. The NGO wanted to have like cooking and dining and eating together to meet the Dutch people. But the Dutch people also wanted to meet the people that they see in television, that they read about in the papers, that there's a big refugee problem all over the world, and especially in Turkey, of course. So we put together this cook and dine together once a month. And in the first quarter of the year, it was already fully booked by the companies because it was a lot of fun, 8.6 on a scale of 10. But they also learned a lot, of course, because suddenly the people got a face and a name, and you meet somebody, you talk to them about life and family and eating and what you have in common. So we did not only did the cooking and eating together, the cooking connection with the new arrivals, but we also, because it was so popular, do it with the elderly and with people like from my age in a wheelchair. So if you have it about the diversity and inclusion, we do the cooking and dining with people in a wheelchair. And one of those persons, Ariana, now is a friend of mine since 3 years. And I don't even see the wheelchair anymore, but I see how she struggles to just go out to the beach for a day. For her, that's impossible without the volunteers of a company to pay for the transport and to guide her. And for me, it's an easy thing. So yeah, that's a lot of empathy you create by working together and eating and dining and meeting each other.
And what was the purpose of the program, Good Busy, in terms of the reason for its existence in the Netherlands?
Yeah, so there's two things. I'm a social impact consultant at Good Busy. That's a national program who doesn't do the matchmaking and the organization, but just gives a lot of advice, toolkits. We made a toolkit together on transformative volunteering, and wants to be a movement on a national level. It's supported by the national government, so they pay for the whole organization. And then the other things that I did, like the practical corporate volunteering, I did in the Brainport region, where we build a network of companies like ours, we did in Turkey with Impact 2030. We build a network local in Brainport, Eindhoven, from companies and nonprofits, and mobilized about 15,000 volunteers from different companies like ASML,
Oh, wow.
XP, and things like that.
That's great.
Cooking Connection is just one of the programs. It's every month. It's a repeating program. The nonprofit gets every month. They get volunteer teams. It's just a different volunteer teams because companies, on the average, only have 2 days to volunteer. So they have different volunteers, but they have a program every month.
Yeah. And I think that's why people like you, Esther, are really important, because these national initiatives to make things happen sometimes can be very disconnected from the on the ground doing the thing with the person, like the actual volunteering where you're interacting with somebody at the nursing home or in one of the new arrival camps. Usually it filters down through many levels and it kind of feels not as human. And so I love the fact that you can kind of span both and cover that. And Lindsey, I know that you do that as well for the World Bank in terms of being, a real person to understand what it means to those small nonprofits on the ground. But you live within a highly politically charged organization, one of the most in the world. How do you navigate when look, I need to have an experience that could potentially bring people to a place where they start asking questions about themselves, not just the good that we're doing in the community, but let's talk about the way that human beings treat other human beings, to bring them to a more social place. And you know you've got an opportunity to do that. How do you navigate the political electricity of the World Bank when it's a little bit edgier than painting a wall?
So I think there's a variety of things. First, we start local. We listen to local partners. We don't expect that what we think in Washington, D.C. is what's going to work in a particular other location in terms of thinking about these issues. So we work locally in that way. We also, there's so many benefits, and a lot of it is leaning in to all the different parts of our institution that may find benefits. And you can think even about corporate social responsibility departments and where they sit in different companies, right? Sometimes they sit with the president of the company. Sometimes they sit in human resources because of benefits for retention and being responsive to staff wanting to engage in the community. Sometimes they're in marketing and communications to work on the image of the company externally. And so given that reality, there's different parts of our institution that are going to find value in this. And as I was alluding to earlier, where sometimes it's the DE&I office that's taking the lead in this in a particular country. And then sometimes it's our ambassadors that connect with our program that are taking the lead. And the key is to have those local champions that are kind of willing to own it and take it forward, but also be mindful and sensitive around their local workforce and what are the right spaces, right? So is the place for inclusion
Do you find like a person, do you find a champion, like you build a relationship over there, sort of cultivate that connection so that they trust you, and then when you bring something in, you've got an advocate on the inside? Are those the kinds of, sounds like that's what you're doing?
Yes, in fact, we have someone just like that on this call who's our champion in Istanbul. And in some ways, but it's not all driven by me. A lot of it is driven by her. And it's me trying to figure out how I can support her. And these things, because a lot of it is you're trying to empower people who want to help make these connections and create this empathy that Esther and Hemang have been talking about, by people having the opportunity to be around each other. And the vehicles for getting to that can vary. And sometimes it is mobilizing our global leadership and our senior management, but it also needs to happen locally, right? Both things need to happen, right? Because the senior management sign off provides the authority, but the work's going to always be local, especially around issues like this.
Okay, I'm going to come back, get a couple questions about that. Hemang, we left you with, look, I can definitely show you the stitching, the seams between business outcomes and what we're doing over here. There's somebody at some point is going to say, yeah, I can see the seams, but do they hold? Like, they're going to do a little bit of a pressure test of that and say, show me, like, what, how important has it been to show people at SAP, the decision makers, like Lindsey was talking about, who kind of allow things to happen? And then how easy is it to reach out to your partners on the other end and get the kind of information and data, whatever they may have, to contribute to that? Like, it's one thing to make the connection. It's another thing to kind of show each other, we bring them into the equation to show the proof that it's working from a business perspective.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think of it in two different ways, right? So one is making sure that our messaging on these programs is very clear. And I know, Chris, we've done a lot of work with the Realize Worth and the Realize Worth Institute as well around volunteering strategy and the benefits of volunteering, both, kind of the team building camaraderie side of it, but also, the more softer side of it, if you will, on empathy building and collaboration and things of that nature. And that holds true really from everything from the traditional volunteering, painting a wall at a local community center, to the more deeper, longer term, if I would say, 4-week social sabbatical, right, which is our the kind of our deepest volunteering experience that we have. We've done a lot of work around positioning learning and leadership development as the core benefit of employees volunteering, and particularly on the pro bono consulting side. So when they are flexing their professional skills to support and solve these challenges. And to prove that point, I think to your point of does this hold, right? On
Yeah.
our 10th anniversary of the social sabbatical, and I put the link to our social sabbatical website actually in the chat. There's a page on impact there, which guests are welcome to check out. We did this 10-year what we call long-term study to showcase do these benefits that we talk about anecdotally often, right, from a participant telling us this was the best experience, I learned all this, great. Does that hold long term? Do they see that contributing to how they act as leaders? Does it contribute to how they bring that back into SAP and their work? Like, is it driving that innovation for SAP? All of those different benefits that we see and talk about, is it doing that? And then, of course, on the flip side, this is a social responsibility program. So is it driving long-term social and environmental impact for our clients, the partners that we worked with on the ground on these projects, right? So we think of impact measurement as the key. A lot of the decisions we make obviously are based on data and, and some of our metrics that we've laid out. So that is something we have invested in. And it's very hard to measure some of these things. I will be completely honest and transparent about it.
Yeah.
But it is something you have to put in the effort and put in the might behind, if you will, if you want to showcase that. Because otherwise, to your point, it's very easy to say, oh, this is all just talk, right? And it doesn't really work.
Yeah. And one of the more, and I'd be interested for any of the panelists to speak to this if you know of anything along these lines. And let me pause and just say, really appreciate our participants or everybody on the call today. But I would love to get a question to ask somebody, to get a contribution. Maybe you have figured out a way to do some of this or address some of this, navigate things, or make a contradiction, like say, wait a minute, that's not, you can't exactly, that's too, like just, you've got to think about whatever that is. Please inform us, because Lindsey and Esther and Hemang came here to learn as well. And they do not spend a ton of time in Turkey on the ground. Ismail, Lindsey talks to his team member there every once in a while, as you heard. But we can learn. We would love to learn. And we would love to even go at a very granular level. If you wanted to say something like, okay, my problem is I don't know how to get blankets from point A to point B and then get them distributed. Like if it's something as specific as that, throw it in. If we can't answer it, we'll see if we can't track down a better answer or think about it. But sometimes the answers just help us think better. The questions just help us think better answers. So here we go. We are going to come back. That was a whole setup. I think I was going over to somebody for something here. Anyways, yes, if you could throw in some questions in the chat box. And Arzu, I don't know if you need to write in the chat box and tell everybody to do it. Maybe you can make everybody ask a question. Hemang, was I coming back to you for a clarifier? I set this up and then I completely forgot the thing I was going to ask. Oh, I know what I was going to ask, Hemang. Okay, let's follow up. And I'm looking for a short answer because we both know Hemang and I, yeah, I'm doing it right now. I'm taking too long to ask the question. Hemang. Business results usually end up as a number on a chart. Impact results, social impact results, a number on a chart. But we are talking a lot about just a shift in mindset. So somebody might say, wait a minute, maybe I could be doing something differently. Maybe I need to think about this differently. Maybe I need to volunteer more. Maybe I need to volunteer less with this, but there's some change. That doesn't typically show up on the business list or the social impact list. But it tends to be what we're talking about here a lot in terms of getting people into a place where they can have this experience, because that's why you three are doing it. Have you considered how to measure for that? Or is that down the road? Or are you doing it now? Okay.
So we do measure for things like career growth, retention, things that do directly impact the kind of our P&L and balance sheet, if you will, for the company as well. And we have been able to showcase proof points. So that really gets people interested. I always like to say that's not everything that these programs contribute, right? Well, that's the most tangible for a CFO to look at potentially. If we increase retention by 2%, we save X million euros or dollars, right? And that's easy to be quantified. So we do try to get that, I would say, combination of metrics that will get executives interested in terms of, hey, wait, this is actually creating value, and then have those stories and and the more impact numbers of empathy, which it's always hard. How do you quantify empathy? And that's obviously not something that's easy to do. So again, just that combination effect is what's most critical in my mind of getting them hooked, and then they engage with you to learn more about all the details.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, good. Hemang, I think the thing we can agree is there's quite a bit that could be built out there. In fact, I believe, but that's a great point of view. But the UN, I think, I can't remember where I read this, but the Sustainable Development Goals, one of the outcomes of Sustainable Development Goals is I don't know how they described it, but adoption of the mindset so that it's embodied inside of us, so that we begin to look at those goals, personify them, and when 2030 ends, we continue them because they become values and principles inside of us. And that is the one thing that's incredibly hard to measure. I think everybody just says, let's hope it's happening. But to get to it, I want to spend, Arzu asked a really great question, which is, what could you explain the difference between transformative and transactional volunteering? And so for this, I want to go to Esther. She and I worked on a bit of an approach for this, and she finalized it for Good Busy, and it was rolled out nationally. So Esther, what is the difference between a transactional experience of volunteering, which is good, there's nothing wrong with that, and a transformative experience? What actually distinguishes them?
Yeah, well, I learned this from you, Chris, because I've been doing this for 20 years and I never found the words for it, because I saw that volunteers changed when you have good programs, that before they start, they have an opinion or a bias about, for example, homeless people. They think it's their own fault and that they're all crazy and addicted and everything. And then when we send companies to do something, for example, with the homeless, they change after just half a day of volunteering with those beneficiaries. They tell me, for example, that a person tells me, she said, well, I go to the train station every day for work, and I passed a homeless person, and always I don't look at them, I don't see them, I don't want to see them, I just move through them, and I don't even look them in the eyes. And after the volunteer activity, she changed her mindset, and she said, well, now I'm not afraid anymore. I look at them, I know it can happen to everybody, it can even happen to me, and I changed my mindset. So we also measured this with 1,600 volunteers in a theory of change model. We asked them, 1,600 volunteers of all different countries, big companies, small companies, and 84% of them said that they had more compassion or empathy for the social issue and the beneficiary. So that's the measurements and the data and the good SurveyMonkey question. And then together with Chris, with his theory and methods, we wrote a toolkit about the difference between transactional and transformative volunteering. Well, maybe with ChatGPT, we can easily translate it in all countries in the whole world.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Easy toolkit. It just when I organize volunteer programs, when you do it transactional and you want to change it to transformative, just by adding a few things like a check-in, check-out, it doesn't take a lot of time. It doesn't have to take a lot of time, but just by squeezing a little bit in your volunteer programs, you can make it more transformative. So you can really see a change in the behavior of the volunteers. And yeah, we can share the toolkits, and you can translate and copy.
Yeah, can you throw those links in there? And then you're right, we can each do our own translation. Arzu, I'm going to come over to you. But basically the idea, and thanks for sharing that, transactional is going and painting a wall. Transformative is going and painting a wall. That part doesn't change. All you do is you frame it with a little bit of a brief at the beginning, which talks about why we're here. And here we're pulling on some science. social identity theory. The more people can contribute about themselves to an activity, the more interested they are in the outcome because it becomes more personal. Proximity to the beneficiary. Can you tell a story so that I can imagine what it would be like to be unhoused and in a camp? And I came from a country where I used to be a doctor, but now I'm living here in a tent. Can you help me visualize what that would be like? So that's part of what the brief is at the beginning. And then there's this cognitive dissonance that we try to resolve at the back end by asking just 2 questions. What did you experience? Was it what you expected? And again, these are not sort of survey questions about how well we ran the event, but questions about who are you in this moment? And what does that mean? And that could spark this trajectory that we started about when we talked about it at the beginning of the call. But that's the difference between a transaction. There's more to it. And Arzu, what I'll do is I'll include in the follow-up notes that we have for this call, I'll include some free resources that we can give people that they can see and use. But you had a question, Arzu.
No, I just wanted to say we would like to translate the toolkit into Turkish.
There we go. That's perfect. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. And headline diversity, she does great graphic stuff. So she can even modify it. It's quite orange because it's Dutch. So you may want to modify it with some great red. And I love the Turkish flag. Any questions? Let's stop for a second and see if anybody, I think people are sort of timid about using the chat box. I'm not sure if we can coax some people to just ask a question. Can be about anything. This is a great group. I love the work that you're doing together in Turkey. It's really incredibly important. Hosting this conversation is amazing. Any questions from anybody? And while you're doing that, I'm going to go back. Lindsey, based on what we've been talking about the complexities of maybe going to some of these places, but maintaining an inclusive mindset and maybe reaching across the aisle to some of our other teams and bringing them informally, but then you think about how do you measure that in a way that makes sense to them. But the main point of all of this is what's happening inside of a person. When you think about your program, what would you add that may be of use to anybody listening?
So one of the things that I think sometimes can be powerful is empowering these individual employees, right? If there are opportunities, if there are paid volunteer days, if there's an opportunity for someone who has gone through transformational volunteering or is otherwise connected, where they can, and this gets to your point earlier, Chris, about where they can see themselves in it, they can lean in a little bit more.
Right.
Because sometimes staff aren't aware of those opportunities. And what we've seen is the more that I have a very small team. And the only way what we do works is we provide these opportunities, and we're seeing staff more and more as they're aware of them are running with them. And that piece, I think, is kind of practically how it can work, but it also makes the work so much more meaningful because it's personal to them. And it also means that when the volunteer activity is happening, when it's someone asking someone in the office next to them to go do it with them. Hey, let's go do this together. That, again, you get this automatic benefit. The other big thing I would say is don't feel like these first activities, if you haven't engaged in this space, don't feel like they need to be perfect. That there's so many benefits out of volunteering together that management, both mid-level and senior, some of this becomes self-evident if you can just find a way to get started, and don't feel like it needs to be perfect before you begin.
Yep. Okay, good. Doesn't need to be perfect before you begin. Have a sense of direction and find some people for whom it's going to matter as much to them as it is to you, and work with them to make it happen. Now, SAP has institutionalized this approach with an ambassador network, some actually paid roles around the different parts of the world. Hemang, what's the secret to actually getting people to do it? Like it's one thing to have the infrastructure and you have it, but you still deal with how do I get people to show up? And that is a big can of worms. I don't expect you to answer all of it, but maybe 2 minutes, a couple of secrets that anybody could pick up.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, it is meeting employees where they are, right? So if I just take the example of the social sabbatical, and I think it was Esther who already mentioned it, right? You may not be able to go away for 4 weeks to do a social sabbatical. You may not even be eligible to apply and be selected for it. But we have invested over the last 3 years now into a variety of virtual offerings that allow employees to do the same things, right? And we are seeing a lot of the same benefits that come from that. Of course, you don't get that in-person immersion if you're doing this virtually.
Right.
But even then, connecting with an entrepreneur, a nonprofit leader, over the phone, over Zoom, or MS Teams, and working with them, understanding their situation, understanding what drives them, we see a lot of those same benefits from people sitting in the comfort of their home or their office, being able to do that, right? And the other benefit is most of those are part-time offerings. So you spend 2 to 4 hours a week, which most people, if they want to, can fit that into their work very, very comfortably. I'm
going to interrupt you just to ask a question. So, because I'm just noticing, Dr. Emrah came on the phone here. That's his first name. I apologize, not using your last name. And I would see a name in the list and go, okay, this person was there. But the fact that he turned his camera on and he's sitting there, I haven't even talked to him. I feel like now after the call, if I was looking at the list, I go, oh, I kind of know him, right? Like a human, once you see another human's face, there's this next level kind of thing. So Hemang, you were talking about having people, reaching out to people over the phone, talking to them. It's not the same as being in person, but you're still going to invite the individual to an experience that challenges the boundaries of what could be, right? Because now I'm talking to a person who doesn't look like me in a different part of the world, and that's all coming through. And it's an extraordinary experience to be able to offer people. So I just wanted to double down on that being valuable too, and why you're still seeing results, obviously.
Absolutely. And I think the biggest thing, sorry.
I was just going to say, Doctor, thank you for letting me use you as a bit of an example there and for being such a good sport. Dr. Emrah.
Yeah,
okay, thank you.
I think the biggest thing, Chris, to add there would be, just by that engagement and the relationship you build, you break down biases. And I think it's fair to say we all have our own biases in whichever direction they go. We may think we don't, but we all do. And breaking them down one bias at a time is the key when it comes to truly being inclusive and being an inclusive leader as a whole.
Okay, good. And because you've got global experience coming over to Esther, I know there's only a couple minutes left. If you do have a question, please do what Arzu did. She made a very good comment and question to help contextualize. Hemang, you are going to be opening up social sabbatical in Turkey. One of the issues is that the most of the people who volunteer are women. Now, I think globally that's a fact, but in Turkey it's even more. It's extreme. What are you planning to do? What are you planning to do to reach more men? No, it won't be. It's not the same because it's a social sabbatical. It's different. Have you run into this? What do you do?
We definitely see that. I think it is making the value proposition very clear, right? We do see a higher number of women volunteering, which, there's a multitude of reasons for that. But really making sure you can define the value of why every employee at SAP, I'll speak for my own company, should be looking to engage in whichever way they're able to contribute, right? Whether it be with the traditional volunteering offering that they do as a team build. So I just want to hang out with the rest of my team and have a great day cleaning up a park, or do something by myself or do something on a small team. I think there is something unique for everyone that a volunteer experience can offer. We just need to be able to reach them with the messaging on it.
So you kind of create conditions that males would kind of want to be in anyways and bring that into the volunteering. I think there's a lot more to explore there, but we're running out a little bit out of time, Hemang. Thank you for that. And everybody, Hemang shared his LinkedIn. If you want to connect with him, that would be amazing. Hemang, congratulations on kicking off the social sabbatical in Turkey this year. And Esther, what have you heard where you're like, I want to add this ingredient to the conversation because I think it would help everybody?
Yeah, that's a hard thing to say in a minute closing, but yeah, volunteering can really bridge the gap, and there's a lot of polarization in the world. So volunteering helps to connect and build a community that is more stronger. So we all do this one by one, and the examples that we hear, and everybody does it in the whole world. So we have a change everywhere. So that's my dream. Yeah.
All right. So the idea is, look, we don't have to make this complicated. Just involve one more person, and then because of multiplication in their network and what they can do, that can spread amazingly. Lindsey, after hearing all of this, anything you want to round off with, and then I'm going to hand it over to Arzu.
One tip on promoting more diversity amongst your volunteers. So in this case, getting more men. Think about the type of volunteer activities you have. So some you're going somewhere else. You can also do volunteer activities inside the office. Also think about incorporating skilled volunteerism. We do that through an internship and mentorship programs. We've also helped. So sometimes we'll have our HR people go and do resume writing workshops for workforce development nonprofits. But just think about doing different types of things, and that might help break down some of the traditional, oh, it's always the same group of women going to volunteer.
All right, great. And Lindsey has a contact in Turkey. Obviously, will facilitate connections with the Impact Council. SAP facilitate connections with the Impact Council as well. So SAP has a sense of what's going on in the ground. The Impact Council there has even people from some of the academic universities there and whatnot. It's a very good group of individuals. And then Esther is going to send the Dutch version, which Arzu is going to translate and make available. I'm going to send a bunch of resources afterwards. Arzu, thank you so much for having us on the call. We're thrilled to be able to come all the way around the world and be with you this evening or this afternoon. And thank you again. Just appreciate it.
I thank you too on behalf of Turkey Council. So all you said was very inspiring for us, and thank you for the everything you share and starting a sabbatical program in Turkey too.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out. I'd love to connect with everybody on LinkedIn. And let's share and support each other even more. This is really important work because otherwise we're going to be, the next generation 100 years from now, it's going to be right back at the same spot. We've got to make a change. And I think the biggest change happens inside of us when we connect with the other and we just take a slightly different direction in life. So here's to all my fellow journey people. Thanks for being here. Cheers.
Thank you very much for having me.
Hi, all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.